I think I mentioned last sermon that the Sunday just been is called Pentecost in the church. And it's the time when we celebrate when the Holy Spirit was poured out and it filled the believers who had followed Jesus and transformed them so that they went out and transformed the world around them. And I was saying, is what we're going through or what we've been through with the coronavirus lockdown, is this going to be a moment or an opportunity of transformation, or are things going to stay the way they've always been? And I think the conclusion that we reached after that sermon, well, it looks like not much will change. But then since then, we've also seen in the United States, just these last few days, this awful situation with this man who was killed by police officers kneeling on him. And we've seen the racial tensions just explode over there. And we know that this isn't the first time things like this have happened. And it's not the first time people have rioted. But we're seeing again just these extremes that are present in our societies. And we're seeing these extremes clashing against each other. It's something that's probably become more and more apparent to me, even just as I look at Facebook and the comments that are made on Facebook in the last few years, that people seem to be more and more polarized. That is, they seem to be more and more drawn to the extreme opinions, so that people who are national supporters are anti-Jacinda, anti the Labour government, anti anything that Jacinda or the Labour government do. And there's lots of personal criticism of Jacinda Ardern and conspiracy theories about this as being the way that the government is trying to bring in communism or extreme socialism into this country. But on the opposite side, we see the same, the mirrored reaction is that people who support Labour are absolutely anti anything that National does, anti the change of leadership, anti the new Todd Muller, the new leader of the National Party. And you just see people so entrenched in their positions that they're not really interested in arguing the pros and cons of the policies. Their mind is already made up who they support, so whatever the people they support do is right, and whatever the opponents do is wrong. And there's far less of a logical, middle-of-the-road weighing up of things. And I think when we see society going that way, it's concerning. To come back to talking about spirit and the role of the spirit in transforming things. There was a German philosopher called Hegel who said that spirit worked through human history, and it worked in this way, that there would come about a new idea, and that idea may be democracy or libertarianism or any new idea you can think of. And he said a new idea would arise, but then, and he called this the thesis. The idea is the thesis. And he said then there would arise the antithesis, or the reaction or opposite of that idea. So he said always in history you get the idea, the new way, the new approach, and then the resistance or the reaction to that. And he says this occurs for some time until there comes about a synthesis. And a synthesis is a new combining of these two opposite opinions that in some way resolves the contradiction between them and elevates the whole argument to a higher level altogether. Now, this is something that he mapped throughout history, through the history of ideas in the human race. And I think it's something that we are seeing at the moment, that we're seeing perhaps this thesis or this idea of socialism in this country, of caring for the weak, caring for those who are at the bottom of society. And that's opposed by the ideas of the free market and not interfering in people's economic lives, not punishing those who work hard for a living and taxing them in order to give money to those who don't work. And so we're seeing this clash at the moment. But there's always available a synthesis, a coming together of these two ideas that includes the best of each idea and in some way resolves their contradiction and moves the human race forward into a better future. Now, I also think that this is possible also even in the extreme situation we're seeing in the United States. We've seen over there the riots, the protests, the violence, the burning of buildings, the looting, and more deaths that are resulting from this outrage, and this justified outrage at the way that black people are treated in the United States and the fear they live in whenever they come into contact with police. But we've also seen a couple of situations where we've seen spirit, the spirit that flows through all human beings and that at times moves us to be our best, moves us to a synthesis, to a way of doing or being or living that overcomes the opposites. There's two ways that this has happened in the United States recently. One was in the Miami police station when the protesters came to protest outside the police station. Instead of the police putting on their riot gear and pushing back the protesters and doing what Donald Trump is urging them to do, which is get tougher, they came out and they stepped outside and they laid down their batons and they knelt down and they asked for the forgiveness of the crowd that was protesting. They asked for forgiveness for the history of police brutality against black people. When you come against a force with an equal force, you only get a clash. But when you come against a force with an open hand, then that force also has the chance, when it is listened to, when its perspective is heard, to open, and you can reach a new synthesis. And what happened was those protesters came forward in tears and embraced those police officers. And instead of there being blacks versus white police, there was people coming together as human beings saying, let's solve this together. Let's be better together. Let's do something different. Let's work out a new future together. The other example I saw was in a place called Flint, I think, Michigan, where the sheriff of the local department there again took off his riot gear, took off their batons, and announced to the crowd that were marching, he said, I want to march with you. He said, let's not make this a protest, let's make this a parade, and we will walk with you. And the crowd began chanting, walk with us, walk with us. Because a synthesis isn't about one force coming against another force. It says if we combine the good that is in both these forces, because there's something right in both opinions. There's always some truth and something right in each of these opinions that come against each other, in the thesis and in the antithesis. That's why people follow them, because there is a truth that needs to be upheld. When these two truths work together to say, let's combine and find a way forward, then human civilization and society can progress and go to a higher level when it reaches a synthesis. I have on the wall of my office a quote from a Catholic theologian who was also a paleontologist and a real pioneer in evolution and in looking at fossils. But he also had a lot of theories about the way that humanity evolves, not just physically and not just how we evolved from apes, but also how we evolve as a species in our consciousness. And he says as he looked at this whole idea of how we evolve and how thesis and antithesis came together and then were transformed through synthesis, he said that love is the only force which can make things one without destroying them. Love is the only force that can make these two opposing forces one without destroying them. So spirit, I think, is alive and well. When I see things like the Miami police or the Michigan police choosing, instead of responding with equal and opposite force, instead choosing humility, opening, peacefulness, forgiveness, reaching out. That's what Spirit does. That's what will transform our society. And so as we approach whatever we approach in our lives, when we are seeing an opposite opinion, let's not just come at it with the opposite force. If we're a National supporter, let's not just unthinkingly slander Labour. Or if we're a Labour supporter, let's not just write off National supporters and national policies. Let's understand. Let's find the good in the other and see if we can come by listening, by cooperating, to a synthesis, to a way of love that moves things forward.